For most of my life, I carried a silence so heavy that it shaped every step I took. People who met me later only saw the woman of prayer, a sister dressed in black and white, kneeling quietly in the chapel. They thought I was serene, peaceful, untouched by the storms of the world. But the truth was that beneath the veil, my heart carried scars that no one could see. The silence I bore was not a choice of discipline, but a prison I could not escape. There are moments when you convince yourself that if you never speak about the past, then it can no longer hurt you. I told myself that lie for many years. Yet silence does not erase pain. It buries it alive. And what is buried alive finds ways to haunt you. In the middle of prayer, during the quiet of the night, in the fragile corners of memory, it returns. When I look back across the many decades of my life, I see not only the choices that brought me here, but also the secret that nearly destroyed me. It is a story I once swore would never leave my lips. It is a story of innocence stolen, of trust shattered, and of the cruel reality that sometimes the ones who should protect you become the very ones who wound you most deeply. My name is Kathleen O'Donnell. For many years, even the sound of my own name felt like a weight. I grew up in a family that from the outside seemed steady and ordinary. We had our traditions, our gatherings, and our simple ways of living. People in the neighborhood thought we were close-knit, but within the walls of our home lived shadows no one else could see. And in those shadows, my childhood was taken from me. I was only a young girl when it happened, still clinging to the innocence of someone who thought the world was safe. I trusted without question, laughed without fear, and believed that family was another word for protection. That was what everyone taught me, that family stands by you, guards you, loves you. What I did not know was that sometimes family can be the sharpest blade. Sometimes the very people who share your blood can turn your world into ashes. My uncle was one of those people who seemed respected by everyone. To neighbors, he was dependable. To relatives, he was loyal. To my parents, he was trustworthy. To me, he was supposed to be a figure of safety. And yet, behind closed doors, he became the reason my voice broke, my trust shattered, and my childhood ended far sooner than it should have. But the wounds he caused did not come only from him. They deepened when those I needed most chose not to believe me. That, perhaps, is the cruelest part of all. When the truth finally clawed its way into the light, it was not my uncle who bore the weight of judgment, but me. I was blamed, doubted, whispered about. The shame was placed on my shoulders, as though I had invited the storm that tore through my life. There is something unbearable about being cast as the guilty one when all you did was survive. The people I once thought would cradle me through suffering became the ones who looked at me with suspicion. My mother's eyes, once soft with comfort, turned searching, cold, uncertain. My father, torn between anger and denial, could not bring himself to see me as the child I still was. And so, while my uncle had stolen my innocence, my family stripped away my sense of belonging. I share this now because I know what it means to live with silence. I know what it means to pray for night to pass quickly, to wake with the same weight pressing against your chest, to believe that if you speak, you will be the one cast out. I know what it means to carry the burden of blame for sins that were never yours. This is not an easy confession. Even as I speak, my hands tremble and my heart races because memory has teeth. But memory also carries truth, and truth, no matter how long it is hidden, will always seek to be known. My story is not just about pain, though it begins with pain. It is not just about betrayal, though betrayal stands at its heart. It is about survival, and about the strange ways healing can find us even when we think we are beyond repair. It is about the girl I once was, the woman I became, and the nun I am today. The silence I carried for so many years nearly consumed me. But tonight in these words I lay it down. This is the story of how my uncle took away my innocence and how my family turned their eyes away from me, choosing to blame instead of protect. It is the story of how I walked through shadows and how, by grace, by faith, and by stubborn breath, I survived. Before the silence and the shadows, there was light. I remember a time when the world still felt simple, when the small joys of an ordinary day were enough to fill me with laughter. I grew up in a modest home, nothing grand or decorated with riches, but it was a place that smelled of warm bread on Sundays and of rain-soaked earth after summer storms. To me, those walls were the world, and within them, I believed I was safe. As a child, I had a natural love for prayer. I do not say this to claim holiness, but because prayer was woven into the fabric of my days. My mother would guide my small hands into folded palms each night before bed. My father would lead us in grace before meals, his voice steady, reassuring. I felt comfort in the rhythm of those prayers, as though every word was a shield against the unknown. Even when I did not understand the meaning, I trusted that someone was listening, that God Himself watched over me. I was a girl full of wonder. I loved the fields near our home, where I would run with bare feet through tall grass, chasing the sound of birds. I loved pressing flowers between pages of old books, convinced that I was saving pieces of summer to return to me when winter came. I laughed easily then, and my smile had not yet learned to hide sorrow. In those days, I was still a child untouched by cruelty. Among my relatives, I felt a special closeness to one man in particular, my uncle. He was my father's younger brother, and to me, he seemed larger than life. He would lift me high into the air until I squealed with delight. He brought small candies tucked in his coat pocket and teased me for having a sweet tooth. He called me Little Dove, a name that once made me giggle with pride. I looked up to him with innocent admiration, never imagining that trust could ever be misplaced. When neighbors saw our family together, they admired what they thought was harmony. My uncle was praised for being dependable, always willing to lend a hand with chores, repairs, or errands. My parents trusted him fully, believing he was a man of strong character. In gatherings, he often told jokes that made everyone laugh, his voice filling the room with charm. For a young girl like me, his presence felt like an anchor, a source of safety when my parents were busy. That illusion of safety would later crumble, but in those early years it was all I knew. The church was also a central part of my childhood. Sunday mornings meant polished shoes, a pressed dress, and the scent of candles burning at the altar. I loved the way light streamed through stained glass windows, scattering colors across the pews. I often whispered my own secret prayers, asking God to bless my family, to keep us happy and safe. In my young mind, it never occurred to me that danger could live inside the very circle of family itself. I remember the laughter of my cousins when we gathered for holidays. We played games in the yard, chasing each other until our cheeks turned red from the cold or the heat of summer. My uncle would watch us with a smile, sometimes joining in our games, sometimes sitting back with the adults, sipping from a glass and telling stories that drew everyone in. I admired him then. I thought he was kind. I thought he was someone I could always run to. That was how children see the world. With trust so unguarded, it can be broken in a single moment. In school, I was quiet, but eager to learn. Teachers often praised me for my diligence, for the neat way I wrote letters across the page. I sat in the front row, raised my hand to answer, and cherished the golden stars placed on my assignments. I wanted to make my parents proud, to be seen as their good, obedient daughter. Nothing about me stood out as remarkable. I was not the brightest nor the boldest, but I loved learning. And I loved the feeling of belonging to a family that, at least to outsiders, seemed so whole. My parents were not wealthy, but they were proud. My father worked hard, his hands calloused from long hours, yet he always found time to sit with me in the evenings and ask about my lessons. My mother sewed dresses late into the night to bring in extra income, humming softly while I drifted to sleep. I never doubted their love. I never doubted their care. It seemed unthinkable that one day I would find myself doubting everything. It is strange how memory works. When I reach back to those years before the shadows fell, I can still feel the warmth of sunlight through my bedroom window, smell the soap my mother used on laundry, hear the creak of the wooden floors as my father returned home from work. These are the details that remain, the small comforts of a life that seemed steady. They form a picture of innocence, of safety, but even within that picture, a shadow was waiting. The truth is that I had no reason then to fear. I did not know the darkness that was drawing near. My uncle was still the man who brought candies and laughter. My family still seemed like a fortress against the world. And I was still the girl who whispered prayers with absolute trust that God and family were one and the same in their protection. If I had known what lay ahead, I wonder if I would have clung more tightly to those moments of simplicity. Perhaps I would have cherished them more, knowing how fleeting they were. For within a short time, everything I believed about safety, about family, and about love would be turned upside down. The uncle I once adored would become the figure who destroyed my childhood, and the family I thought would shield me would turn their eyes away and lay the blame at my feet. Looking back now, those early years seem almost like a dream, fragile, distant, and too easily broken. They were the calm before the storm, the silence before the shattering, and though I did not yet know it, my life was about to change forever. When I think back to the first time my uncle betrayed me, I wish I could say there was warning, that some storm cloud had formed on the horizon, that my heart had sensed what was coming. But there was nothing. Life had seemed ordinary that morning. I was still a child, still convinced that trust was my birthright. That illusion shattered in a single afternoon. It was late spring. The air outside smelled of lilacs, and the windows of our house were thrown open to invite the breeze inside. My mother had left to tend to errands, and my father was working long hours as usual. I had been tasked with simple chores, folding laundry, sweeping the kitchen floor. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. My uncle stopped by, as he often did, carrying the same casual smile that made everyone trust him. At first, I was glad to see him. I remember offering him a glass of water, eager to show the politeness my parents always encouraged. He teased me for being so proper, ruffling my hair as though I were still a little girl. His presence seemed ordinary, just another afternoon when he dropped in to check on things. But beneath his easy smile, there was something different in his eyes that day. I could not have named it then, but it unsettled me. I remember how he lingered, how he asked me questions that felt oddly personal. "You're growing up so fast," he said, his tone half admiring, half unsettling. I laughed nervously, brushing off the words, but a chill crept down my spine. There was no reason to be afraid, and yet fear had begun to bloom inside me like a shadow stretching across the floor. When he stepped closer, my instinct screamed that something was wrong. I tried to retreat toward the window, but he blocked the way, his figure filling the space. The air in the room seemed to thicken, as though even the walls knew what was about to happen. I remember clutching the broom handle, my hands trembling, not understanding why the man I trusted suddenly felt like a stranger. What he did in those moments left me stunned and confused. I will not describe the details, because they are not necessary to understand the depth of betrayal. It was not just an action. It was the tearing away of everything safe, everything familiar. The uncle I had once adored revealed himself as someone who could wound me in a way I had no language for. When it was over, the silence was deafening. I stood frozen, my breath shallow, my body rigid with shock. He patted my shoulder lightly, as though nothing had happened, as though I were supposed to carry on as before. "Don't say anything," he whispered, his voice calm, almost fatherly. No one would understand. No one would believe you. It's our secret. I felt my chest tighten, my throat burning with words I could not form. My lips parted, but nothing came out. I wanted to scream, to call for my mother, but fear held me silent. His words sank in like poison. No one would believe you. And in that moment, I believed him. When he left, the house seemed different. The same rooms, the same furniture, but now every corner carried a weight I could not escape. I dropped the broom, fell to my knees, and pressed my palms against the floor as though I could steady the world that had just tilted. I was not the same girl who had woken that morning. Something inside me had been stolen, and in its place was a wound too deep for a child to bear. That night, I tried to act normal at dinner, but my silence was noticeable. My mother asked if I was feeling well, and I nodded quickly, afraid that my eyes would betray me. My father mentioned how tired he was, and I stared at my plate, wishing I could disappear into the shadows. Across the table, my uncle laughed at a story he told the others, and no one saw the way I flinched at the sound of his voice. In the days that followed, I convinced myself that maybe it had been a mistake, that I had misunderstood, that it would never happen again. Children often try to soften reality, to mold it into something bearable. But the truth does not soften. It returns, sharper each time. The next time he visited, I avoided his gaze, slipping out of rooms whenever he entered. He noticed. "You're quiet these days," he remarked, his smile never faltering. To others it sounded like gentle concern. To me it was a warning. His words carried the unspoken reminder that silence was expected, that any attempt to speak would be crushed beneath doubt and blame. I prayed harder than I ever had before, kneeling by my bed, whispering desperate pleas to God. Please make it stop. Please let me wake and find it was a dream. But prayers do not always bring immediate deliverance. Sometimes they simply give you the strength to endure. And endure I did, day after day, trapped between fear and disbelief, silence and shame. The betrayal of that first afternoon left a mark that shaped every moment afterward. I no longer looked at my uncle with admiration. I looked at him with dread. I no longer saw my home as safe. I saw it as a place of danger, and I no longer felt like a child. Childhood had ended in that moment, replaced by a silence I did not know how to carry. Looking back now, I understand that was the day the shadows truly began. It was the first cut in a wound that would deepen over time. It was the beginning of a secret I would be forced to hold, one that would twist my family against me, one that would make me doubt myself again and again. It was the first betrayal, but it would not be the last. After that first betrayal, I thought surely the world would see the truth without me speaking. I thought my eyes, my trembling hands, my sudden silences would shout loud enough for someone to notice. But no one did. Instead, what grew louder were the whispers my uncle planted, the threats he left me with, and the doubts that began to spread like cracks in glass across my family's trust in me. His words followed me everywhere. No one will believe you. They were not just warnings. They became chains. I was too young to understand how quickly doubt can grow in the minds of others, how one man's careful manipulation can turn an entire family against a child. When I tried to stay away from him, he noticed. He would catch my wrist as I passed, holding it just long enough to remind me of his power. His smile never faltered in front of others, but when no one was watching, his eyes narrowed in quiet threat. He never had to raise his voice. The danger was in his calmness, in the way he made silence itself into a weapon. At family gatherings, he would lean close and whisper, "Remember what I said? It's our secret." And when I pulled away, he would chuckle loudly, so everyone thought he was only teasing me. To the rest of them, it looked harmless. To me, it was a reminder that my voice had been stolen. I wanted desperately to tell my mother. There were nights I stood outside her room, hand raised to knock, tears burning in my eyes. But then I would hear his voice in my mind again, They'll blame you. They'll say it was your fault. I would retreat back to my bed, curl under the blanket, and press my hands over my ears as though that could silence the memories. And the worst part was that, slowly, I began to believe him. Children have a way of internalizing blame, of thinking they must be the cause of their own pain. I wondered if perhaps something in me had invited his cruelty. Perhaps my laughter had been too loud. Perhaps my trust too naive. Shame became the shadow I carried, heavier each day. School became difficult. I no longer raised my hand with confidence. My neat letters trembled on the page, my thoughts scattered like frightened birds. Teachers asked if I was ill, and I only shook my head. How could I explain a sickness that lived not in the body, but in the soul? Friends began to notice my quietness. I withdrew from games, from laughter, from the easy innocence that once defined me. At home, my parents started to question my behavior. My mother would ask, "Why are you so distracted? Why don't you smile anymore?" My father grew impatient, scolding me for daydreaming or making mistakes with chores. And every time they looked at me with confusion or disappointment, I felt the truth settle deeper inside. If I told them, they would not believe me. They already saw me as troubled, as difficult. My uncle's lie was already taking root. One evening, when my father asked my uncle to walk me home from church, I froze in terror. But how could I refuse? To refuse would raise questions I could not answer. So I obeyed, my legs trembling as we walked in the fading light. Along the way, he leaned close and murmured, "If you say anything, your family will hate you. Do you want your parents to think you're a liar? Do you want to be the one who tears this family apart?" The words pierced me more deeply than any action. I did not want to be the reason my family fractured. I did not want my parents' love to vanish. And so I chose silence, though it never felt like a choice at all. In that silence, doubt consumed me. I began to question not only my family but God himself. Each night I knelt by my bed and prayed, asking why he allowed such things to happen. Was I being punished? Had I failed in some hidden way? My prayers became desperate bargains. If I endured without speaking, perhaps things would return to normal. But they never did. My uncle, emboldened by my silence, acted as though nothing had happened. He laughed with my father, carried groceries for my mother, played the role of the trusted brother. And each time I saw them smile at him, I felt more invisible. The truth I carried burned inside me. But to the world, it was as though nothing had changed. The cruelest part was when my own behavior became evidence against me. My quietness, my reluctance to be near him. These were interpreted not as signs of trauma, but as signs of rebellion. I overheard my mother telling a neighbor, "She's been so strange lately. I don't know what's gotten into her." My father agreed, shaking his head. And there, in their words, I heard my uncle's lie confirmed. So I withdrew further, building walls around myself. I learned to mask my fear with politeness, to hide my trembling hands behind folded ones. Silence became not only forced but chosen, because I convinced myself it was safer. Safer to say nothing, safer to pretend, safer to carry the blame myself than to risk being cast out entirely. But silence is not safety. Silence is its own kind of violence. It corrodes from the inside, convincing you that you deserve the very pain you endure. I did not know it then, but every day I stayed quiet. The hold of his power grew stronger. And every day my family remained blind. The gap between us widened, until the home that once felt warm now felt like a prison. I was still only a child, yet I felt centuries older. I moved through days like a ghost in my own life, unseen, unheard, carrying a burden too heavy for my small shoulders. My uncle had stolen my innocence, but it was silence, his threats, my family's doubts, and my own shame that threatened to steal the rest of me. As the weeks slipped into months, silence wrapped itself around me like a second skin. I no longer recognized the girl I had been before. My laughter was gone, replaced by cautious smiles that never reached my eyes. Even my reflection seemed like a stranger, a child's face carrying the heaviness of secrets far too large for her to hold. At school, my teachers noticed the change. I, who had once been diligent and eager, now stared at pages without understanding the words. When they called my name, my answers stumbled. The neat handwriting that had once won me praise grew shaky, letters uneven, ink blotted by trembling hands. "She's distracted," I heard one teacher murmur to another. They thought I was daydreaming, but the truth was that my thoughts were not dreams at all. They were nightmares that clung to me even in daylight. Friends grew distant, not because they wished to leave me, but because I pushed them away. Their laughter, their carefree chatter felt foreign to me now. I would sit at the edge of the playground, tracing circles in the dirt with my shoe, pretending to be absorbed in nothing at all. If anyone asked what was wrong, I shook my head. How could I tell them that the very ground beneath me no longer felt solid, that trust itself had been shattered? At home, the distance between me and my parents widened. My mother's voice, once warm, became edged with frustration. "Why do you look so gloomy all the time? Why can't you be more like your cousins?" she asked. I lowered my head, swallowing words I could never say. My father, already weighed down by work, grew impatient. "Straighten up," he ordered. "You're old enough to know better than to sulk." Each word stung, not because they meant to harm me, but because their disappointment confirmed what my uncle had whispered, that somehow all of this was my fault. My uncle, of course, played his part well. In front of my family, he remained cheerful and kind, offering to help with chores, praising me in ways that seemed innocent. "She's just quiet these days," he told my parents with a shake of his head, as though he too were puzzled by my behavior. His act was flawless, his mask unshakable, and the more he charmed them, the more suspicious they grew of me. It wasn't long before whispers began within my own home. I heard them when they thought I was asleep, their voices drifting through thin walls. "Something's not right with her," my mother said. "She's changed," my father sighed heavily. "She's bringing shame on us, acting so strange." The words pierced me deeper than any blade. They saw me not as a wounded child, but as a problem to be solved. Shame became my constant companion. I carried it into every room, every conversation, every prayer. I began to believe that maybe they were right, that maybe I was the cause of everything. My uncle's threats had become my own thoughts. Perhaps if I had been stronger, wiser, more careful, none of this would have happened. The weight of it all began to show in my body. I could not sleep without waking from dreams that left me trembling. My appetite faded, food turning to ash in my mouth. Dark circles formed under my eyes, and my skin grew pale. My dresses hung more loosely each week, though I tried to hide it by tying the fabric tighter. My mother scolded me for not eating, unaware that it was not hunger I lacked, but the will to face another day. Even my faith, once a refuge, began to tremble. I knelt to pray, but my words faltered. The God I had once seen as protector now seemed distant, silent as the rest of the world. I begged for deliverance, begged for my family to see me, begged for the truth to find its way to light. But each night ended the same. Silence answering silence. The collapse of my innocence was not marked by a single moment, but by a slow unraveling. Every day another piece of me slipped away, a smile, a laugh, a spark of trust. The girl who once believed in the safety of family no longer existed. In her place was a child aged far beyond her years, weighed down by burdens she could never share. I remember one evening vividly. My family had gathered for supper, and my uncle sat across the table, smiling as though nothing were wrong. My father praised him for helping with repairs around the house. My mother laughed at one of his jokes, and I sat there silent, pushing food around my plate, wishing desperately to disappear. My mother's voice broke into my thoughts. "Why do you always look guilty, Kathleen? What are you hiding? Her words struck me like a blow. I wanted to scream the truth across the table, to point at him and shout what he had done. But fear gripped my throat, and I only lowered my gaze. In that moment, I realized how alone I truly was. My uncle had stolen more than my innocence. He had stolen the bond between me and my family. He had twisted it until they saw me not as their daughter, their niece, their child, but as the source of shame. The collapse of my innocence was not only in what he did, but in how my family's eyes changed when they looked at me. I had once believed that family was unbreakable, that blood bound us together in love. But blood can bind just as easily in silence, in lies, in betrayal. And so I carried the blame they placed on me, adding it to the burden of silence I already bore. My childhood was gone, and in its place was a hollow shell of who I had been. The body cannot carry forever what the soul has been forced to endure. My silence had built walls around me, but those walls were crumbling, and soon the weight of what I carried began to show in ways no one could ignore. It was as if every unspoken word, every suppressed scream, had carved itself into my skin, leaving me weaker each day. I stopped sleeping. Nights became long stretches of staring at the ceiling, my chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. When I did drift off, I woke tangled in the sheets, my throat raw from muffled sobs. My hands trembled during the simplest of tasks, and my thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. In school, I forgot answers I had once known by heart. At home, I moved like a shadow, silent and clumsy, dropping plates or spilling water because my body no longer obeyed me. My mother grew impatient. "You're always so careless lately," she scolded. My father, weary from long hours of work, snapped more easily at small mistakes. They did not see the trembling in my hands, the way my breath caught in my throat when my uncle's footsteps echoed through the house. They only saw a daughter who was falling short of their expectations. But others began to notice what my parents missed. My teacher, a woman with kind eyes, stopped me after class one afternoon. "Kathleen," she said gently, "you look pale. Are you eating enough? Is something troubling you?" I forced a smile, assuring her I was fine, but her eyes lingered on me with concern. For a moment, I wanted to pour everything out, to tell her the truth and let the burden fall. But fear sealed my lips again. The words refused to come, and I walked away with my secret intact, though my heart screamed to be heard. Soon, even my body betrayed me. One evening, after weeks of sleepless nights and endless dread, I collapsed. I remember standing in the kitchen, trying to help my mother with supper, when the room suddenly tilted. The floor rushed up to meet me, and darkness swallowed everything. When I woke, my mother's anxious face hovered above me, her hands fluttering helplessly as she called my father. My uncle stood in the corner, his expression carefully composed, watching as if he were nothing more than a concerned relative. But I saw the flicker in his eyes, not of worry, but of control. They took me to a doctor the next day. He examined me quietly, his brow furrowing as he listened to my shallow breathing and felt my trembling pulse. "She's under stress," he told my parents. "Exhaustion, perhaps. She needs rest, and she needs care." My mother nodded, promising to make sure I ate better, to see that I got more sleep. But the doctor's gaze lingered on me with something unspoken, as though he saw there was more I could not say. I remember lying in bed afterward, the doctor's words echoing in my mind: stress, exhaustion. Words that barely touched the truth but hinted at it just enough that I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe someone somewhere would see through the silence. Maybe someone would understand. My uncle, however, was not blind to the doctor's suspicion. He leaned close to me that evening, his breath heavy with menace. "Do you see what happens when you let people look too closely?" he whispered. "If you tell them anything, you'll destroy your family. You'll be sent away. No one will love you anymore." His threats pressed down harder than ever, and my small spark of hope dimmed beneath the weight of his words. Yet the breaking point was not only physical. It was spiritual as well. My prayers, once steady, now poured out in desperation. I clutched my rosary beads until they left marks on my palms, begging God for deliverance. I no longer asked for joy. I asked only for survival. Please, I whispered into the darkness. Please let someone see me. Please let someone hear me. One night, my prayers felt answered, if only faintly. A neighbor, an older woman who often visited my mother, pulled me aside as she was leaving. "Child," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from my face, "you carry such sadness in your eyes. Don't keep it all inside. Secrets will break you." Her words nearly undid me. Tears threatened, but I swallowed them back, nodding quickly. Though I said nothing, her kindness lit a candle in the darkness. Someone had seen me. Still, the collapse continued. My appetite dwindled further. My weight dropped until even my dresses hung loose. My skin turned pale, my eyes hollow. My mother scolded me for not eating, but worry was written across her face as well. My father grew restless, his sternness masking concern he did not know how to show. I was unraveling before them, and though they did not yet understand why, they could no longer ignore that something was wrong. The breaking point came not in one dramatic outburst, but in the slow recognition that I could not keep silent forever. My body was failing, my spirit was faltering, and my silence was consuming me. Whether I spoke or not, the truth was pressing outward, demanding to be known. I did not yet know how it would come, or when, or who would finally listen. But I knew this. I could not continue as I had been. The silence that had once felt like safety was now choking me. Something had to give. And when it did, it would change everything. The truth does not stay hidden forever. It seeps out through cracks in silence, revealing itself in ways we cannot control. For me, it happened when my body and spirit could no longer disguise the weight I carried. I had collapsed too many times, withdrawn too far, and grown too frail to keep pretending. My family could not ignore what was right before their eyes, though when the truth finally broke through, it did not set me free. It shattered everything. The beginning of the unraveling came after another fainting spell, this time at school. I had been sitting at my desk, the teacher's voice droning softly in the background, when the words blurred together. The room tilted, and I slid from my chair before I could catch myself. Gasps echoed around me. When I opened my eyes, faces hovered above me, concern etched across them. For the first time, I could not brush it aside. A doctor was called, and questions were asked that I could no longer escape. In the small, sterile room of the clinic, the doctor studied me closely. He asked about my sleep, my appetite, my worries. His eyes were gentle but piercing. I shifted uneasily, my hands twisted in my lap. "Kathleen," he said quietly, "you're carrying more than a child should. Has someone hurt you?" The words hung in the air like a door opening in a dark hallway. My lips trembled, and though I wanted to deny it, tears betrayed me. I did not speak fully then, but the truth showed in my silence. It was enough for suspicion to take root. When the doctor spoke with my parents, I heard their voices rise. My mother's sharp tone cut through the wall. "Are you saying something happened?" "That's impossible." My father's voice was strained, defensive, demanding answers. I sat in the hallway, clutching my hands together, wishing I could disappear. My uncle had told me no one would believe me, and hearing their voices, I feared he had been right. But questions began. My teacher, the doctor, and even a neighbor pressed my parents to look closer. Whispers of concern circled until finally, cornered by too many eyes, I broke. One evening, sitting at the kitchen table with my mother, tears poured down my face as I whispered the truth. My words stumbled, broken and halting, but the meaning was clear. "It was Uncle," I managed, my voice cracking. He hurt me. The silence that followed was unbearable. My mother stared at me, her face pale as stone. At last she shook her head violently. "No, don't say that. Don't you dare say that." Her voice was sharp, not with anger at him, but at me. My heart shattered as she rose from the table, pacing as though my words were poison in the air. When my father came home and she told him, his face hardened. He looked at me not with compassion but with suspicion. "Do you know what you're accusing him of?" he demanded. His voice trembled with fury, but not directed at the man who had harmed me. It was directed at me. "He's my brother. He would never. You're confused. You're making this up." I tried to speak, but my voice collapsed beneath their disbelief. "I'm not lying," I whispered, tears spilling. But their eyes told me they had already chosen who to believe, and it was not me. The confrontation that followed was like a storm tearing through our home. My parents summoned my uncle, their voices raised, their words sharp. He stood calmly, his mask firmly in place. "She's troubled," he said smoothly, casting me a pitying glance. "I don't know why she would say such things, but I forgive her. Forgive me, as though I were the sinner, the liar, the one who needed pardon." His performance was flawless, and I watched as my parents' anger turned fully toward me. "You've brought shame on this family," my mother spat. "How could you invent something so vile?" My father's disappointment was heavier than any blow. "Do you realize what you've done? You've nearly torn this family apart with your lies." Their words crushed me, but what destroyed me was the look in their eyes, a mixture of anger and disgust, as though I were the one who had betrayed them. In that moment, I realized my uncle had stolen more than my innocence. He had stolen my family's trust, twisting it until it strangled me. From then on, the house was no longer a home. Conversation stopped when I entered rooms. My mother's gaze turned cold, my father's words clipped and harsh. Relatives whispered behind my back, some openly accusing me of seeking attention, others avoiding me altogether. I had spoken the truth, but in their eyes, I was the liar, the destroyer of peace. The weight of blame settled heavily on my shoulders. I withdrew even further, shrinking into myself, carrying not only the wound of what my uncle had done, but also the wound of rejection from those I had loved most. Silence had once been forced upon me. Now disbelief reinforced it. My voice had been smothered, and with it, my place within my family. The discovery of truth should have brought rescue. Instead, it brought devastation. My family was shattered, but not in the way I had hoped. They were not broken by anger at him. They were broken by suspicion of me, and in the ruins of that trust I stood alone, a child cast as both victim and villain. Looking back, I know this was the cruelest cut of all, not what my uncle did, but how my family turned away when I needed them most. Betrayal from him had ended my childhood. Betrayal from them nearly ended me. When the storm of accusation and disbelief had reached its peak, I felt certain there was no escape. My uncle's shadow loomed over everything, and my parents' rejection had cut away the last threads of safety I thought I had. I braced myself to carry the silence forever, even after the truth had been spoken. But sometimes deliverance comes from unexpected places, not in the form of triumph, but in the fragile shelter of survival. It was a teacher, the same one who had noticed my pale face and trembling hands, who finally raised her voice in ways that could not be dismissed. After my collapse at school and the vague answers from my family, she began to press harder. She spoke with the doctor, with neighbors, and even with clergy from the parish we attended. Her words carried a force mine never could, for she was an adult, respected and trusted. Slowly, the web of secrecy began to tear. A priest from our parish came to visit, a man who had known our family for years. I remember sitting in the living room, my parents stiff with defensiveness, as he asked gentle but direct questions. "Kathleen," he said softly, "you have carried so much on your shoulders. You are not to blame. Can you tell me what happened?" His eyes were kind, and something in me broke. I whispered the truth again, halting and terrified, but this time it was not brushed aside. His face grew solemn, and he looked at my parents with a gravity that could not be denied. My parents protested, of course. My mother insisted I was confused, that I had been influenced by gossip. My father shook his head, anger tightening his jaw. But the priest did not waver. "This child needs protection," he said firmly. "If you cannot provide it, others will." Those words marked the beginning of my rescue, though they also sealed my isolation from the family I longed to cling to. Arrangements were made quickly. Within days, I was sent away from the house that had once been my home. Some called it for my safety, others called it punishment. And truthfully, it felt like both. I was placed in the care of relatives who lived far enough that my uncle's reach could not easily touch me. Their house was quieter, their rules stricter. But for the first time in a long while, I breathed without fear of his sudden presence. Yet safety did not erase the ache. The nights were long, and I cried silently into my pillow, mourning the loss of the family who should have defended me. My parents did not visit often. When they did, their words were clipped, their eyes heavy with disapproval. My mother barely met my gaze. My father spoke in tones of forced civility, as though speaking to a stranger. Their distance confirmed what I already felt, that in their hearts I had been cast aside. Still, small mercies appeared. My teacher visited once, bringing books she thought I might like. "You're brave," she told me, pressing my hand gently. The priest too checked in, reminding me that God's silence did not mean absence. "Sometimes," he said, "God works through the hands of others." At the time, those words felt thin, but they planted seeds of endurance. My uncle's fate was whispered about, but never fully revealed to me. Some said he left town under the weight of suspicion. Others claimed he had been confronted quietly, forced into shame away from the family's sight. To me, the details mattered little. His absence was all I needed. The danger had been removed, but the scars remained. The days in my relatives' house were not easy. I felt like an intruder in their routines, a burden they carried with polite obligation. Their children avoided me at first, unsure of what my presence meant. I overheard their whispered questions at night. "Why is she here? What did she do?" Even among extended family, the story was twisted, leaving me painted as a cause of trouble rather than its victim. But there were also moments of fragile comfort. A cousin once sat beside me, slipping a small piece of candy into my hand without a word. It reminded me of the innocence I had lost, yet it also reminded me that kindness still existed, even in small gestures. My aunt, though distant, sometimes left an extra blanket folded at the foot of my bed. These were quiet mercies, not enough to heal, but enough to remind me that I had not been erased completely. Rescue, I learned, does not feel like triumph. It feels like survival amidst ruins. I had been pulled out of the fire, but I stood alone in the ashes, staring at what had been destroyed. My childhood, my family's trust, my sense of belonging, all lay in pieces around me. Safety was fragile, built on distance and secrecy, but it was still safety. For that, I clung with every breath. It was in those quiet nights, away from the home I once knew, that I began to whisper new prayers. They were not prayers of joy or even of hope. They were simple. "Lord, give me strength to live tomorrow. Give me strength to endure." And slowly, I began to believe that survival itself was a form of grace. When I was first removed from the home I had known, I believed that survival was the only thing left to me. I thought the rest of my life would be spent carrying wounds in silence, that no light could ever reach me again. But slowly, in ways almost too subtle to notice at first, healing began to thread its way into my days. It did not come as a sudden miracle. It came as a series of quiet mercies, like candle flames flickering in the darkness. In the beginning, I felt hollow. The betrayal of my uncle and the rejection of my parents had carved deep scars inside me. I woke each morning with heaviness pressing down on my chest. But in the home where I now lived, though I still felt like an intruder, I was safer. That safety, fragile as it was, gave me room to breathe. It was the first step toward healing, the simple fact that I could wake without dread of his footsteps approaching. My teacher continued to visit, sometimes bringing books, sometimes simply sitting with me as I struggled through my lessons. She reminded me gently that I was not defined by what had been done to me. "You are more than this sorrow," she said once, her voice steady. At the time, I did not believe her, but her words planted roots that would grow years later. The parish priest, too, remained a steady presence. He encouraged me to return to prayer, even when I felt God was silent. "The silence is not abandonment," he told me. "It is an invitation to listen more deeply." His words puzzled me then, but I held them close. At night, I began kneeling by my bed again, whispering prayers not of demand but of surrender. They were shaky, hesitant, but they were mine. It was within the walls of the church that I began to feel the faint stirrings of healing. The chapel smelled of wax and wood, and the stained glass windows painted the pews in gentle colors. I sat in the back at first, head lowered, afraid to draw attention. But as the weeks passed, I found myself drawn to the rhythm of the prayers, the rise and fall of hymns, the quiet strength of voices joined together. For the first time in a long while, I felt less alone. One evening, after Mass, a nun approached me. She was older, her eyes lined with age yet soft with kindness. "Child," she said, "you sit so quietly, but your heart speaks loudly. Do not be afraid of what you carry. God can transform even the deepest wounds." Her words startled me, for she seemed to see through the silence I wore like armor. That conversation lingered with me for days, stirring something I had not felt in years, the faint possibility that my pain could have purpose. Time did not erase the wounds. There were still nights I woke in terror, still days when my chest ached with longing for the family that had turned away. But I also began to notice small changes. My appetite slowly returned. Food no longer turned to ash in my mouth. My hand steadied enough to write again, my letters forming neatly across the page. I even laughed once quietly at a small joke my cousin made. It startled me, that sound. Foreign, yet familiar, like remembering a song I once loved. Healing came not as forgetting, but as learning to carry the memory differently. My uncle's betrayal and my family's rejection were part of me, carved into my history, but they no longer defined every breath I took. I began to sense that I could become something beyond my pain, though I did not yet know what shape that would take. It was the nuns at the parish who drew me further into faith. They invited me to help with small tasks, lighting candles, arranging hymnals, carrying baskets. At first I hesitated, feeling unworthy, but their patience was gentle, their encouragement unwavering. With each task, I felt a strange sense of belonging, as though I had finally found a place where my silence was not judged, where my scars did not disqualify me. One evening, while helping in the chapel, I lingered after the others had left. The room was quiet, the only sound the faint crackle of candles. I knelt before the altar, tears streaming down my face, and whispered words I had not dared to speak before. "Lord, if you can use even someone as broken as me, then I give you what is left." It was not a polished prayer, but it was the most honest I had ever spoken. From that night on, the idea of serving God became more than comfort. It became a calling. The thought frightened me at first. How could someone with my history, my scars, my doubts ever serve in such a way? Yet the more I prayed, the stronger the sense grew. My pain had not been erased, but perhaps it could be transformed into something that might help others. I began spending more time with the sisters, learning from their quiet strength, their discipline, their devotion. They did not press me to speak of my past, yet they seemed to understand. Their presence alone was a balm, reminding me that there were lives built not on betrayal, but on faith and love. Healing is not a straight path. Even as I drew closer to faith, I still stumbled. There were days I could not pray, days when bitterness surged within me, days when I longed for the family I had lost. But in the chapel's stillness, I learned that stumbling did not mean failure. It meant I was still walking. Looking back, I see part 9 of my story not as triumph, but as turning. It was the moment when my life shifted from merely surviving to slowly embracing the idea of purpose. The wounds were still there, but so was the faint whisper of something greater. That whisper would grow louder in time, leading me toward the life I live now. When I look back across the years, it is difficult to reconcile the girl I once was with the woman I have become. There are times I still feel the echo of that frightened child, curled beneath the weight of betrayal and disbelief. Her tears are part of me. Her silence still lingers in the corners of my memory. But I am no longer only that child. I am something more, something forged by both suffering and survival. My name is Kathleen O'Donnell, and today I live as a nun, bound not by silence, but by choice. I do not hide behind walls of fear anymore. Instead, I walk among others who carry wounds, offering them the one thing I once thought I had lost forever: hope. Becoming a nun was not an escape. It was not running away from the world. It was stepping into the truth that even broken lives can bear fruit. My scars are real, but they are not chains. They are reminders of what I have endured and of what God can do with even the most shattered vessel. In the quiet halls of the convent, I have found a home unlike any I knew before. A home built not on denial, but on truth. Not on betrayal, but on compassion. Every day I meet people who carry secrets of their own. Women who whisper about pain they have never shared. Children whose eyes reveal more than their words. Men weighed down by guilt and shame. When I sit with them, I do not offer empty assurances. I tell them I understand what it means to carry a silence that corrodes from within. I do not always share the details of my own story, but when I say, "You are not alone," I speak with the weight of lived truth. Forgiveness is often the question people ask me about. Did you forgive him? They wonder. My answer is never simple. Forgiveness is not a moment, but a journey. There was a time when I hated my uncle with every breath, when I wished for justice that would crush him beneath its weight. That hatred nearly consumed me, but over time, I realized hatred chained me to him just as much as silence had. Letting go of that hatred did not mean excusing what he did. It meant freeing myself from carrying his shadow in my soul. Forgiveness for me is not forgetting. It is choosing to live without poison. As for my parents, their disbelief remains the deepest wound of all. I longed for their embrace, their protection, their belief in me. Instead, I became a stranger to them. In time, I accepted that they may never have the strength to face the truth. That acceptance was not easy, and it still aches. But I no longer measure my worth by their blindness. I am not defined by who failed to love me, but by the God who never left me, even in the silence. In the convent, I have found sisters who know that life is often woven from both joy and sorrow. Together we rise for prayers, we labor with our hands, we share meals in simplicity. There is healing in this rhythm. The girl who once felt invisible now belongs to a family not of blood, but of choice. And in their company, I have learned that love is not limited by the past. It is renewed each day. Sometimes, when I light candles at the altar, I think of that little girl who knelt by her bed, begging God to see her. I wish I could reach back through time and hold her trembling hands, whispering, "You will survive this. You will find a way forward. You will become more than the pain that tries to break you." I cannot change what happened, but I can speak to her now through every act of kindness I offer to others. My story is not one I ever wanted to tell. For years I thought silence would be safer, easier, but silence did not heal me. Speaking did. Even if my voice shakes, even if my words reopen wounds, truth is always the first step toward freedom. And so I tell it now, not to dwell on the past, but to show that healing is possible. If you carry a secret like mine, if you have been wounded by those who should have protected you, hear me. You are not to blame. Your voice matters. Your life matters. And though the road may be long, healing is not beyond your reach. My uncle took something from me that can never be returned. My family turned their eyes away when I needed them most. But neither of those truths define the end of my story. I am not only what was taken from me, I am what I chose to become afterward. They took my innocence, but they did not take my faith. They took my trust, but they did not take my spirit. And today, I stand not as a victim, but as a witness, that even from wounds, wisdom can rise.